Oh, Brazil. Very cool. Welcome. Okay, everybody, we are on the hour now. I'd love for us to get started so we don't run out of time. We got a super exciting session for you all today. So welcome to Consolidating Security, bringing host-based firewall to the Carbon Black Cloud. This is part of our monthly office hours series. And yes, you heard that right. These happen monthly. So keep your eyes peeled. We send an invite right after this. So you'll get a recap email with all the info from this session, as well as an invite to the next one, which I believe is XDR. You'll find out in the email. So today we are joined by Senior Manager of Product Management and Host-based Firewall Extraordinaire, Arjun Narang. So very exciting to have him join us to chat about Host-based Firewall, as well as my teammate and Host-based Firewall product marketing expert, Sean Lee Reardon. She'll be keeping track of all your questions, all your concerns. So be sure to be super active in the chat. Be super active in the Q&A. We will pause throughout the session in order to answer your questions. If there are just way too many questions and we can't get to them and we don't think we're going to finish in time, keep in mind we're reserving the last 30 minutes for Q&A. So if you want to store your questions, write them down and save them for when we have the last 30 minutes open Q&A. That's a good way to go forward. One other quick note, we do these to not only share what we're up to and what we're doing and what we're building and why we're building it, we do it to hear from you. That is pretty critical for us. And we're pushing forward as hard as we can to create programs like this where we're listening. The point is to listen. The point is to understand you. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions you have. Also, please don't hesitate to send me an email after if you're not comfortable asking it during this session. I'll post my email in the chat, but just so you have it now, it's rrosell@vmware.com. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Really appreciate you all. I won't talk about the abstract of the session because you all read it in the registration forms you filled out. So without further ado, I'd love to pass it over to Arjun. Take it away, Arjun.
Great. Thanks, Roy, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Roy mentioned, I am a Senior Manager of Product Management here at VMware Carbon Black Cloud, or VMware Carbon Black. I will be spending some time today to go through Host-based Firewall. Being on the product management team, I am the product lead for Host-based Firewall. Took that from kind of conception to GA over the past year. And so excited to share with you all what we have released, how it fits into the entire Carbon Black Cloud portfolio. And, we'll probably tease at the end here a little bit about what's coming in the future. And as Roy mentioned, definitely, want this to be interactive. The more questions, the more feedback that we get, the more beneficial I think it is for all of us, and including myself. So please don't hold back on any questions in the chat or Q&A as we go through it, and we will try and stop throughout to address those questions and comments. All right, and we only have about 10 slides here, so it shouldn't be too long of too much of content for me. And again, that's the hope, to kind of keep this interactive. So I'll start here. I think kind of, want to ask a question to get started as I talk through this slide. Just want to understand, given that host-based firewall is available from Carbon Black as an add-on to, there's the first question, it's available as an add-on to Endpoint Standard. So wanted to understand, as I talk through this slide from you all in the chat or Q&A, how many of you are already Endpoint Standard customers who would be eligible to add this to your existing package? So as you'll answer that, I'll go through this slide here and continue talking. So Carbon Black Cloud as a whole, right? Our goal is to provide you with one single platform that interconnects all of the use cases that you need to secure your environment, right? That spans from identifying risk, understanding how your environment is configured with tools like vulnerability management and audit and remediation, into sort of creating rules to prevent bad behavior, malicious behavior in your environment with tools like our NGAV policies, our device control, as well as what we'll be talking about today in more detail, host-based firewall. and then extending that into extended detection and response to understand what is happening in your environment with an extreme level of visibility and layered on intelligence, so that you not only know what's happening, but you know whether that is potentially good, potentially malicious, potentially things that you need to investigate more deeply, and kind of connecting that all through the response mechanisms as well, either through your own team, through ecosystem integrations, through Carbon Black's MDR types of solutions, and providing that full suite of security capabilities across your workload. So servers, virtual machines, containers that could be on-prem or could be hosted in the cloud, as well as your endpoints, your laptops and your desktops that all of your employees are using as well. And we make that available through Carbon Black Cloud. We also have a couple of on-prem solutions with app control and an on-prem EDR solution as well. So that is the entire kind of suite. And going forward, I'll talk a little bit more about how Host-based Firewall fits in. I see a question here, Endpoint Advanced. So yes, the minimum requirement for adding on Host-based Firewall is Endpoint Standard. If you have Endpoint Advanced or Endpoint Enterprise, you are okay as well to add Host-based Firewall. The key here is that Host-based Firewall is built on top of the policy engine that we have available with our next-gen antivirus kind of prevention policies. So if you were an enterprise EDR customer who did not have the NGAV core set of capabilities with Endpoint Standard, we would not be able to add Host-based Firewall to just that enterprise EDR or just the audit and remediation kind of standalone products that we have. But as long as you have Endpoint Standard or higher, we will be able to add Host-based Firewall to your environment. So just to dive a little bit deeper into how we see kind of the operations within the SOC playing out and how Host-based Firewall fits in there, we see this as kind of an evolving continuous security model. So it starts kind of in the, well, it can start anywhere, but for the sake of this discussion, we'll start in the policy design section where you're looking at your environment and you're thinking about, okay, what rules and behavioral rules do I need to create to protect my environment? Those can be, again, kind of NGAV rules, some of which Carbon Black provides out of the box, others that you create on your own, knowing that certain applications should not be allowed to run or based off of reputations of applications and processes, or again, firewall rules that you say, you don't want certain outbound connections to be allowed or certain inbound connections as well. Going from there, you look at what you have designed in your policy and you vet those rules. You analyze them via, testing the rules through tools that Carbon Black has available to you or other solution vendors do. Or you just kind of, review it internally with your team to understand what you have designed and how that fits in your environment. Once you are comfortable with those rules that you've created, the policies that you've created, you start to enforce those policies. So now you are specifically allowing or denying certain behaviors. You are specifically creating alerts based off of certain behaviors for further analysis as well. And as you generate those alerts, you start to see, okay, hey, this is a malicious behavior that was flagged by a policy that is being enforced. Let's now take the next step of understanding that alert, doing an investigation of the root cause, determining whether that was a true positive or a false positive, and then determining what are the remediation and response actions necessary to manage that alert, to remediate the potential attack or malicious behavior that occurred in your environment, which typically, one aspect of that remediation is redesigning your policies to better prevent that malicious behavior from occurring in the first place, right? There are remediations that are reactive, and there's also the proactive portion of that remediation, which is kind of starting the cycle over again with your policy design, vetting, and enforcement. And so that is the cycle. And as mentioned, Host-based Firewall is just another one of these policies that you create, you enforce, will generate alerts for you, will help you with the investigation, and then will also allow you to remediate via those new rules that you would create. I'm sorry, let me take a step back here. I'll pause here because I think I saw a couple more questions. Is it included at any suite level, David? So no, it's not included. The Host-based Firewall incurs a decent amount of cost on the Carbon Black side. And so to account for that cost, we have it available as an add-on. It is available as an add-on at any of those bundle levels. but it is not included in any of the suites currently. Looking at here, there's a question on NSXT and any sort of redundancies or benefits. It all just, I think the primary benefit that we would see here with Carbon Black Firewall is that if you're already using Carbon Black and NSX, you would get that layer of protection directly within the Carbon Black Cloud sensor. So it's available to you directly on the endpoint. We integrate with Windows Defender firewall capabilities on the Windows side, and we will be extending to Mac and Linux as well similarly. So you will get a different level of visibility and the control being done on the endpoint itself. At a high level, the functionalities are very similar. I think it's more when you get into the details of the exact workflows that you want to cover and the exact use cases, things that we'll talk about on our roadmap that NSX may not have, like location awareness and kind of network profiles, which you would see in kind of a typical endpoint firewall solution, maybe not at the distributed firewall layer. Some of those things may come up that are beneficial that Carbon Black provides. But yes, at a high level, the firewall concept is somewhat similar there. All right, on the pre-packaged compliance policies, Dave. So no, today we do not have any sort of pre-packaged rules out of the box for host-based firewall that would meet these compliance standards. We are looking at that as a roadmap item for us to provide you with rules out of the box that will help you get started with host-based firewall. That would say things like, block all known malicious websites. They could also be around compliance policies, but as of today, we do not have that in host-based firewall. Navar, the core prevention. So yes, and we have a few screenshots here coming up. Is host-based firewall part of the policy like core prevention, or is it separate? In the screenshots, you'll see how host-based firewall is integrated into Carbon Black's policy management as a whole. And so I'll kind of pause on that and get into that a little bit later as we get deeper into the slides. Any suggestions you're getting? Sorry, Dave, reading your question here. I think that one is probably, I believe, a little bit out of the host-based firewall scope. So maybe we'll pause and we'll hold that one till the end as we kind of get through some general host-based firewall stuff first. Peter, does host-based firewall have capabilities to automatically ingest IOCs from sites? So today we do not, Peter. So the question is, does host-based firewall have capabilities to automatically ingest IOCs, such as IP addresses, domains, URLs from other websites to automatically block known bad? And so today the answer is no, we do not have that available directly in the UI. We do have a few tools that could help with that process, and I'll talk about roadmap as well in a bit here. But in terms of those capabilities, we do not have that today to automatically ingest. You can leverage the host-based firewall platform and feature set is entirely available via APIs. So if you are able to export the data from those websites or other vectors where you have known malicious IP addresses, domains, URLs, you could export those as IP addresses and then import them into Carbon Black Cloud's host-based firewall solution via the API. We also have a tool that's available through our support team for when you're transitioning from Windows Defender Firewall to Carbon Black Firewall to allow you to very quickly and easily kind of translate those Windows Firewall rules and directly import them into Carbon Black Cloud. And yes, David, I agree with you and Peter that this would be a great functionality to have, and it's something that we are aware of, just something that we did not get through with V1. With V1 of the feature. Keith, great question here. Does host-based firewall have an intrusion prevention system, or is it firewall exclusively? Currently, it is firewall exclusively. As you all know, we also recently released XDR, which, as Roy mentioned, will probably be the next office hour session here. As we go forward with host-based firewall, we are looking at how we can tie those two together, right? XDR focuses a lot on network detection right now, network detection and response for us. Part of the R in network detection and response, the response aspect, is creating host-based firewall rules and policies that would cater to those malicious behaviors that are detected by NDR. So yes, that is a thought we have going forward, but no, it's not available in the product today. Good questions. Definitely keep them coming, and hope that the answers are useful. If they are not, please feel free to type in follow-ups here, and myself or Shanley and Roy will help to answer those questions. Okay, so diving deeper here on the host-based firewall functionality as a whole, just wanted to ask a question here, and it'll kind of bleed into a little bit of the next slide, but just to hear your responses. Curious to hear from all of you in the chat, what sort of firewall solution, if any, you are using today. I assume you are using some sort of solution, but what is that firewall solution? Is it kind of an OS native package, like what Windows or Mac or Linux deliver out of the box, Linux with IP tables and things like that? Is it from another solution besides Carbon Black, whether that be like a legacy AV provider like Symantec or others, or if it's from an entirely different third-party solution? NSX was mentioned. There are other kind of exclusive firewall solutions as well. So curious to hear what you all are using today in your environment. Just as we get those answers in the chat, going through kind of what is the Carbon Black Cloud host-based firewall. It gives you the ability to create and manage firewall policies using the existing Carbon Black Cloud policy interface, which you can see here, next to the general and prevention and sensor tabs, we have added a host-based firewall tab here. It allows you to create rules and rule groups to control the behavior, the network behaviors of your application. So again, looking through the screenshot, you can see you'll provide a rule name and an action. You can allow a behavior, you can block a behavior, or you can block a behavior and generate an alert. For anything that is blocked in by the Carbon Black Cloud host-based firewall, you will see that behavior appear as an event or observation in your investigate page. When you're creating host-based firewall rules, you have the network 5 tuple, the IP, local IP and port, remote IP and port, as well as the direction. You also can specify an application path. And then again, you can specify the action to take. And when you're creating these rules, right, the order of operations, as it does with any firewall, is very important. And so we allow you to create that stack rank precedence of all your rules and rule groups here, so that we ensure that we enforce those in order with a baseline default rule of allowing you to say, hey, by default, I want to allow all traffic with block exceptions, or by default, I want to block all traffic with specific allow exceptions. And great, I'm glad to see the chat comments coming in here, and we'll address those kind of in the next slide here. The final thing with firewall, right, is as you are building all of these rules, that helps you to automate your response and remediation actions, because we will generate those alerts for you, will trigger those blocks, will allow you kind of, as we discussed earlier, to investigate the behavior and root cause any malicious behavior that is occurring, and modify your firewall policies or your other remediations across your network to to have more control over what is occurring in your environment and what is allowed to occur. And so as we hop into this next slide, I'm going to quickly just kind of skim through many of the answers here. It looks like a lot of you are using Windows. Some of you have mentioned kind of layering firewall options on, which definitely makes sense. I see some NSX in here as well. And so definitely agree that kind of the layered solution is what makes a lot of sense here. And what we want to do is have Carbon Black be part of that layered solution, and to eliminate the redundancies where they exist, where I see a lot of you are using Windows today. And we do hope to help you to eliminate that kind of redundancy with having to have Windows Defender Firewall and some of the limitations that exist there, and bring all that into Carbon Black Cloud, while recognizing that at the same time that you have Carbon Black, it may not be a replacement for what you were doing through NSXT or through Cisco, through Meraki or other solutions there. But we want to make sure that we provide that layer of security on the endpoint itself that helps in the modern environment, where you are not always having all of your devices connected to the corporate network or even connected via VPN at times. And you can put that firewall directly onto the endpoint itself, so that no matter where your employees are, your corporate assets are being protected in the way that you would want them to. So to talk about, some of the issues that you may be facing with those solutions you're using today. I saw a lot of responses that related to kind of you're currently using Windows. The OS native firewall is a great kind of elementary solution, I guess, or a great solution to start. But the feedback we have heard and from our own experience, it is very complex to manage at scale. I think a lot of customers we've talked to who are using Windows Defender Firewall are managing it via GPO, which is not really designed to be a firewall management solution, kind of in the way that you saw it and in the way that I'll show going forward, that Carbon Black has designed our firewall user interface, right? To make it more expansive for setting precedents, being able to view all your rules very easily, assigning those rules to different assets easily as well in the way that we do it through our Carbon Black policy management, giving you that centralized visibility and ease of management that you're not getting with the OS native solutions today. Then you have, some of you, I think I saw a few in here that are kind of using legacy or maybe have come from legacy EPP firewall, EPP host-based firewall solutions. And large issue that, is often encountered there are the resource instability concerns, right? Those vendors typically put a lot of intelligence for host-based firewall management, endpoint firewall management into their sensor itself, and that creates significant overhead on the endpoint. With Carbon Black, we've taken a different approach, and I'll get into that in a second here, that reduces those concerns around stability and resource overhead by offloading a lot of the intelligence to the OS native controls that already exist on those endpoints. And then finally, some of you, as you are using today, you mentioned kind of you mentioned the layering approach, which may still be necessary, but we do want to reduce the need for having multiple vendors to address the full endpoint and workload security set of tools that you need by providing that through Carbon Black Cloud. So eliminating that necessity to have multiple sensors, multiple consoles to manage what you all would view as kind of the complete endpoint and workload security solution. So those were some of the problems we saw and some of the goals that we tried to address with host-based firewall, especially in the first phase, and we'll do more and more as we go forward. And I'll get to a few questions here in a second. But what we use today for host-based firewall and our goals there are to help kind of centralize that policy management, right? What we talked about with some of the issues with the OS native tools or with having multiple vendors to do firewall versus the rest of your NGAB and endpoint security. We want to bring all of that into the Carbon Black sensor, as well as into the Carbon Black Cloud UI, and give you that centralized policy management and the elimination of disparate tools so that you no longer need those multiple sensors and agents on all of your endpoints. You can now consolidate everything with Carbon Black Cloud, while recognizing also that you may have other, firewall solutions, but at least from an EPP type of perspective, right? Giving you all the controls that you expect from an EPP vendor and being able to consolidate there. And then finally, increasing your network visibility and control, right? And this goes hand in hand as well with kind of the XDR, NDR capabilities that we've released too, but, giving you that more visibility on the network behaviors that are occurring in your environment, giving you the ability to create those alert rules within host-based firewall that will generate alerts when there are malicious network-based behaviors, as well as kind of generating those observations and events every time that host-based firewall blocks a network behavior that you define as wanting to block in your environment. So again, these are kind of the three sort of values that we want to make sure we provide, and I'll go into a little bit more details here in the next slide. But going to pause for a second to review some of the questions that have come in here. And just make sure that we address some of those as well. So seeing the AI verification from Paul would simplify a lot of this. And I agree. I think, adding in both human and machine intelligence from the Carbon Black team itself, as well as machine intelligence will certainly help make that process of creating and managing rules easier for you all as administrators. And that is something that, we are looking to address in the future. We just wanted to make sure that to get started, we gave you that core competency, core capability of being able to create those rules, manage them, and view them from the centralized console. And then we will continue to build on and make that an easier process for you going forward. Can the host-based firewall from Dave, can the host-based firewall alerts and activity feed into a SIM? Yes. So I would have to check on the status with data forwarder. I believe this is integrated already into the Carbon Black data forwarder, but definitely via API. All of this data is available via all of the alerts that we generate, as well as the events and observations are available via the Carbon Black API. So you can pull those into your SIM and other tools, just like you would any other data within Carbon Black Cloud. And yes, definitely, Don, want to address that. If you don't feel comfortable answering questions about your business, as mentioned, this is a recorded session, so please don't feel obligated to. Where you feel comfortable, the interaction is definitely appreciated, but understand, of course, that you don't necessarily want to answer all those questions in a recorded session, or want to, or cannot as well. A question here, can you 100% disable just host-based firewall per policy? Yes, so out of the box, when you purchase host-based firewall, we do not enable the host-based firewall control. We'll give you the views to create rules. We have a process that allows you to test the rules to see how they're behaving. And kind of on, if we go back here a couple of slides, and we'll get into it as we go forward too. But on the sensor tab, there will be a checkbox there that says enable host-based firewall. This will replace your Windows firewall rules, your native firewall rules. It will disable those and then enable the Carbon Black firewall rules instead. So yes, you can disable Carbon Black host-based firewall per policy just via that toggle on the sensor page. What kind of firewall is it? Does it go all the way up the stack? So Keith, here we are providing kind of the endpoint firewall, so it's based on the endpoint side, and the controls are limited to just the IPs and ports and the protocol as well, and then the application path. So those are the controls that we are giving there. We have a question in the Q&A as well. If a host-based firewall rule is triggered, does it generate alert, and what does that look like? I don't believe, unfortunately, we have a screenshot of the alert, but I can kind of describe it here and tell you. So when you are creating a host-based firewall rule, you have an option to have 3 actions. Those actions are either to allow the behavior, block the behavior, or block the behavior and generate an alert on that behavior. So yes, if you set that action to block an alert, we will generate an alert when that firewall rule is triggered. For any rule that's set up as a block, you will see that behavior in your events and observations. So at minimum, if we block something, you will see the behavior that was blocked and the rule that was triggered shown in your events and observations within Carbon Black Cloud. And if you choose to have the rule be set to action, block, and alert, we will also generate an alert. What does that alert look like? We will show you basically the details of the rule and the specific behavior. So the details of the rule being kind of the rule name, I believe it's the rule name or the rule group name, we will show you in the alert. And we'll show you kind of, it's some combination of like the IP address and port that were blocked by the host-based firewall rule, as well as the application path or process that was executed. Again, I apologize that we don't have the screenshot available, but I believe we have some demo content and things like that that are available elsewhere that will have kind of the specific alert content represented there. When we say host, Tony, we mean the actual laptop or desktop, not the ESXi host. Yes, so host-based firewall here is endpoint firewall, not ESX host, kind of from the VMware terminology. It's yeah. Then a great question on FQDNs, which we will get to in the roadmap. But today, no, it is exclusively IP addresses. We are evaluating the ability to support FQDNs, and I'll talk in more detail on that when we get into kind of the roadmap session here. All right. So moving forward here, right, the benefits that we just talked about, right, and kind of covered a lot of this as well, but want to make sure that we dive deep on each of these bullet points here. So first, right, host-based firewall is bringing you that ability to have flexible rule-based enforcement. As you saw in the initial screenshot, and as you'll see going forward, and as I've kind of talked to, Host-based firewall gives you that ability to create multiple rules across within your Carbon Black Cloud policy that will control the local and remote IP and port, the associated protocol, as well as the direction of that communication and the associated application path. We will allow you to move those rules up or down in order of precedence for when they are getting processed on the endpoint. And we'll make sure that you have that ability to kind of, test those workflows, test those rules directly within Carbon Black Cloud as well. So we integrate that rule management directly into the Carbon Black Cloud policy framework that you see today. If any of you have been on roadmap sessions discussing kind of some of the changes that are and improvements that are coming with policy management, you will also see firewall be incorporated as part of those, policy management improvements too. So just want to emphasize there that host-based firewall, even though it's a separate feature that's available as an add-on, it is directly integrated into Carbon Black's overall firewall management, throughout the stack. We are constantly communicating across the teams to make sure that that stays in sync and updated across those two. We have the automated alert and response actions built into the rules. As I mentioned, we have those 3 categories of rules where you can either block, alert, you can block, allow, or block and alert. And so you will get those alerts. You will get the events and observations for anything that firewall blocks. We also have a test mode for all of the host-based firewall rules, which is slightly different than the kind of core prevention or just general prevention rules test rule format that we have there. Sorry, one second, let me grab a sip of water real quick. Sorry about that. So with the core prevention or the kind of prevention-based rules, the test rule functionality that we have there within Carbon Black today looks back at the past 30 days of behaviors and tells you that if you enable a rule, it will have this impact based off of those behaviors that we've seen. With Endpoint Standard, we don't collect every single network behavior that occurs. So therefore, that idea of saying, hey, for host-based firewall, just show me the past 30 days of behaviors and tell me what would have been blocked is not possible, because Endpoint Standard by default does not collect that data. That only comes with enterprise EDR, right? So given that, what we do for host-based firewall testing rules is we have a toggle for you where you can click to put a rule into test mode. Once you put that rule into test mode, we will immediately start to collect all of the behaviors that are associated with that rule that would have triggered that rule if it was in an enforce mode, if the rule is in an enforce mode. Those behaviors will show up as events and observations in your investigate page. You will be able to kind of, keyword search for tests. You will have an automated investigate icon that's associated with that rule so that you can see all that data in your investigate page just for that specific rule, to understand that, okay, if this rule is enforced, what will the impact be to my environment? What will be blocked? What will be allowed? When it's in test mode, right, we're still allowing that behavior to occur, but you will see that, okay, if this rule goes into enforcement mode, I will start to, Carbon Black will start to block all of these behaviors. And is that what you want, or is that too restrictive or anything else like that? Yeah, so we'll give you that increased visibility as well, right, with all the alerts and events. And we have integrated it directly into the native OS firewall tools. So to be clear here as well, there are kind of 3 layers that we could have built the Carbon Black host-based firewall into to integrate it with the operating system, or just in general. One is we could have gone completely independent, put all of the controls into the Carbon Black sensor, and just, kind of done it in the way that many legacies and legacy AV solutions do it, where the sensor owns the firewall entirely and does all of the detection of behaviors, enforcement of rules entirely in the sensor. Now, the downside, as we spoke to earlier, downside of that approach is that you create significant resource overhead as well as stability concerns when you put all of that logic into the sensor and all of that control into the sensor. Scale becomes an issue, performance becomes an issue, and stability as well becomes an issue, because it's not being done by the OS, it's being done by a third-party sensor. And if the OS makes a change, that could break the sensor's firewall controls, which then, just because the sensor wanted to do that firewall control, you have now kind of, caused a stability issue with your endpoints. So that's one approach we could have taken that we chose not to for those reasons. The other approach is kind of in the entirely opposite direction, which is we could have built a wrapper around the existing firewall management solutions that exist today. So for Windows, as an example, we could have just built a wrapper around Windows Defender Firewall to say, hey, we're just giving you visibility into the rules that you've created in some level of management or control at that high level. That would not give you the flexibility to, do things like precedence, which Windows Defender Firewall does not have. I would not give you the flexibility in the future to incorporate things like FQDN support, which we'll talk about later. It would be limited to just what Windows Defender Firewall provides, but kind of give you that benefit of additional management, but again, be severely limited in terms of capability. The third path, which is kind of in between those two, and the one that we elected to take, is integrating with what's called, on the Windows side, WFP, the Windows filtering platform. That allows us to kind of, push rules to the Windows OS and have Windows do the actual enforcement of the rules so that our carbon black sensor is not involved in the enforcement process, and therefore relieving some of those stability and performance concerns that would come if we did everything within the sensor, while still giving you more flexibility in terms of the rules you create and how you create them, especially when we go forward and we talk about introducing controls for fully qualified domain names and others, still leveraging this type of workflow integrated in that intermediary layer with WFP. And at the same time, this also gives you the centralized management that comes with kind of Carbon Black Cloud, pulling all of those rules from across multiple endpoints, having you create that from a centralized console in Carbon Black Cloud and pushing them across multiple endpoints simultaneously. But just having the OS itself take care of the enforcement. And that model will extend when we extend our coverage to Linux and Mac as well, to have the OS take control where it can so that we are not adding any unnecessary overhead, but making sure that we also provide additional flexibility and ease of management through Carbon Black Cloud. Okay, so I'll pause here as well to answer a couple of questions too. So will host-based firewall be top-down similar to how GPOs work? If you need to put in a global firewall rule, you don't want to have to go to 100 Carbon Black policies to make the change. So within the firewall rule creation, and I'll jump ahead here to the screenshot to see if we can highlight it here. So, sorry, and this will evolve over time. Today, you will have to create the rule within one policy first to get started. And then from there, you can click the copy icon here. That will allow you to copy that rule and specify which policies you want to copy that rule to. And you can just go ahead, copy that rule group essentially, or rule across multiple policies simultaneously. So that should help with some of the overhead in the future going forward. Carbon Black policy as a whole is looking at a rules library type of concept, which would enable more centralized visibility and management of those rules through Carbon Black Cloud. And in that model, you would likely be able to create a host-based firewall rule within the rule library, and then from there, push it to all the relevant policies that you want it to be enforced upon. So in the end, firewall rules will be tied to a policy, so you would have to push it to multiple policies. But the goal is to make you not need to create that rule in every single policy, which is what we're trying to address with our centralized management here. And then another question, will there be any relationship between isolation and blocking and host-based firewall rules? So today, those are treated somewhat independently in terms of order of precedence. Anything that is sort of set up to block will take precedence. So if it's a isolation or blocking rule created within within the prevention rules that conflicts with an allow host-based firewall rule, the block in isolation and blocking will take precedence. If it's vice versa, where there's an allow and there's a host-based firewall rule for block, the block will take precedence. So today, those are treated independently. Going forward, we are looking at, how do we make that story make sense? Because you can create some level of network controls or even application controls. Obviously, application controls you can do through isolation and blocking, and there is some overlap there. For now, we wanted to just make sure again that we got out that host-based firewall controls and that we didn't create any conflicts. But yes, building that story more tightly together is part of our future goals. And I think, again, as you look at sort of the general Carbon Black policy management roadmap, that is where we would start to look at, okay, how do we integrate some of the host-based firewall controls and make this more of one story rather than feeling it sometimes like it's two separate tools. Okay. So again, great questions. Please do keep them coming, and hopefully this is useful as well. And sorry, David, I'll answer this question as well first. So does host-based firewall disable the OS firewall completely? And copying everything from the OS firewall over to Carbon Black firewall sounds like quite a task. So yes, enabling host-based firewall, checking that box on the sensor page where you explicitly say you want to enable host-based firewall within that Carbon Black policy, it will disable the OS firewall rules completely. So to alleviate that concern of like, how do I make sure that all of my existing OS firewall rules get transferred into Carbon Black Cloud Firewall and that I don't lose any functionality when I enable Carbon Black Firewall and thereby disable the OS firewall. We have a tool that is available through our support team. So you can raise a ticket and ask for access to this tool, which will allow you to, from any endpoint, basically say, run that tool, pull all of your Windows existing OS firewall rules, and then copy them over to the Carbon Black Cloud host-based firewall policy so that you ensure that all of your OS firewall rules have been copied over to the Carbon Black Cloud host-based firewall, and that you won't lose any coverage when you do make that switch from the OS firewall to Carbon Black Cloud Firewall. So yes, we understand that's a concern. We also designed it in this way where we completely disable the OS firewall to ensure that there aren't any conflicts, right? What happens if you have a rule on the Windows firewall that says allow this behavior, but in Carbon Black you said block that behavior? Which one would take precedence? Those sorts of things we wanted to make sure that we resolved by putting everything into a centralized sort of Carbon Black Cloud firewall management. Okay, so looking at kind of the screenshots here, I want to make sure that we get through this as well. So within the Carbon Black Cloud policy management UI, within your kind of enforced policies left pane here that would exist, you will now see this tab for host-based firewall. Within here, you will have the ability to view all of your host-based firewall rules. Right? This is where you can create rules and rule groups. You can add rule groups here. A rule group is basically a logical grouping of multiple host-based firewall rules that's meant to simplify your management so that you say if you have a bunch of rules that are meant to control PowerShell, you can put them all into a single rule group. You can always expand that rule group to see what the individual rules are and what the precedence is. But this just allows you to know that, okay, hey, there is this rule group that exists to control PowerShell. I may not need to worry about the hundreds of rules that I have created in there to control PowerShell. I just want to know that PowerShell rule group exists, again, with the ability later to dive deeper, but making sure that's there. And so, yeah, again, we've talked about a fair amount of this already, the kind of the parameters that exist, the IP, local and remote IP and port, direction, protocol, application path, kind of leveraging our existing policy framework here to do that, and giving you the ability to copy rules, edit rules, delete rules. As I mentioned here under the actions panel, you have this ability to test rules as well, to sort of see that preview of what behaviors would have been, what rules would have been triggered in your environment, while just still allowing you to allow those behaviors in production. When it comes to creating a rule, right, this is our add rule group workflow. You would add a rule group, or similarly, if you're back here and you click the edit icon, it would bring up a similar diagram that has your edit rule group functionality. You provide a name for the rule group, a description of what that rule group does, and then you create multiple rules within that rule group that have a name, have all those parameters around IP and port and protocol and direction and application, and then you check whether you want to enable that rule out right away, or whether you want to keep it disabled and maybe test it for a bit before you go ahead and start enforcing it. And so just looking through a couple more of the questions here. So yeah, I want to address the observation or learning mode. So going back a page here, this test rule is our first step at observation or learning, where you can put a rule into test mode. We will generate events and observations for every single behavior that would have triggered this rule. And no worries, the questions are always good, whether, I think it's important to repeat some of this information for people who, you aren't the only one who missed it, I guess, is my point. So you can click that test rule button. It will generate observations and events based off of that rule for any behavior that would have triggered that rule. From there, you can see, okay, this is what that rule would look like in an enforcement mode, and then make a determination whether you need to modify that rule to be more granular or less granular, and then finally make that decision to enforce it. So that is sort of the stage of observation learning mode. We recognize that there are deeper controls we could do around observation and learning to kind of be more proactive, show you all behaviors, start to flag certain behaviors that we think are potentially malicious, and suggest rule creation from that, or even automatically create rules. Those are things that we will work on and will continue to address going forward. But again, today to start, that's the level of observation that we have for you. And I see the comment on FQDN as well. I think here I want to pause, and I think we want to share with you more details on roadmap. Unfortunately, for recorded sessions, we cannot do that. So Roy, I think at this time, if we want to stop the recording, we can go ahead and maybe get a deeper discussion, more open discussion on kind of what's coming in the roadmap.
Awesome. Yeah, we got a treat for all you live guests today. This will not appear in the final recording. So I will pause recording now, and then we will cover some roadmap stuff. Here we go. Thank you, everybody who's joining us via the video. See you next time. And recording has